On June 3rd, 1997, inside the Stade de Gerland in Lyon, France, two national teams walked onto the pitch for what looked like just another friendly match. France were preparing to host the 1998 World Cup. Brazil were the defending world champions after lifting the 1994 FIFA World Cup in the United States. The stadium was full, but not electric. The crowd was relaxed, curious, and quietly confident in their own team. Nobody inside that stadium believed they were about to witness one of the most studied and replayed goals in football history. Brazil lined up with stars everywhere. Ronaldo Nazario, the phenomenon, already terrifying defenders across Europe. Romario, the lethal striker who had carried Brazil 4 years earlier. Dunga, the disciplined captain in midfield. And standing quietly at left back, a 24-year-old defender with tree trunk legs and a thunderous shot, Roberto Carlos de Silva Rocha. At that moment, Roberto Carlos was respected, but he was not yet immortal. He had only recently joined Real Madrid in the summer of 1996, after a short and complicated spell at Inter Milan. Many in Europe still doubted him. Some critics believed he was too attacking to be a proper defender. Others thought his positioning was reckless. But those who trained with him knew something the world was about to discover. His left foot was not normal. It was violent. It was explosive. And sometimes it looked supernatural. Roberto Carlos was born on April 10, 1973, in Garca, Sao Paulo, Brazil. He grew up in poverty, like many Brazilian legends. As a child, he worked in a coffee plantation to support his family. Football was not luxury. Football was escape. Football was survival. He developed his powerful legs by running barefoot on rough ground, building strength in ways no academy could replicate. By the early 1990s, he began climbing through Brazilian football with União, São João, and later Palmeiras, where he won 2 consecutive Brazilian Serie A titles in 1993 and 1994. His attacking style from left back shocked traditional football thinking. Defenders were supposed to defend. Roberto Carlos wanted to attack like a winger. When he joined Inter Milan in 1995, many believed Europe would polish him into a complete player. Instead, tactical disagreements with manager Roy Hodgson limited his freedom. Carlos struggled. He felt restricted. He felt misunderstood. And after just 1 season, Inter sold him to Real Madrid for around $3.50 million, a transfer that would later look like one of football's greatest bargains. But on that warm evening in Lyon, he was still proving himself. France, meanwhile, were building something special. Their squad was filled with talent that would soon conquer the world. Zinedine Zidane, the elegant midfielder whose control seemed effortless. Didier Deschamps, the intelligent leader in midfield. Laurent Blanc and Marcel Desailly commanding the defense. Fabien Barthez guarding the goal with fearless energy. France were becoming a powerhouse, and they wanted to measure themselves against the best team in the world. The match started calmly. France pressed intelligently. Brazil relied on skill and speed. Possession shifted. Challenges flew in. It was competitive, but it still felt like a friendly. Then, the moment arrived. Brazil won a free kick in the 21st minute. The foul occurred about 35 meters from goal, slightly to the right side of the pitch. Too far for most players. Too wide for comfort. Perfect for Roberto Carlos. As he walked toward the ball, television cameras followed him casually. Nobody leaned forward in shock. Nobody gasped. The French defensive wall lined up carefully. Fabien Barthez positioned himself slightly left, calculating angles like every professional goalkeeper is trained to do. The ball was placed carefully on the grass, and Roberto Carlos stepped back. 4 steps, 5 steps. His run-up angle looked strange, almost exaggerated, almost theatrical. The stadium murmured. Some Brazilian players began smiling. They had seen this before in training. They knew something could happen. Carlos stared at the ball. Then he began his run, each step heavier than the last. Each stride building momentum like a train approaching full speed. And then his left foot exploded through the ball. The strike produced a sound that commentators later described as a cannon. The ball launched wide, incredibly wide. So wide that for a split second, ball boys and spectators behind the goal prepared themselves to catch it. French defenders relaxed. Barthez barely moved. The ball looked like it was heading meters outside the post. But then something unnatural happened. Mid-air, the ball began to bend. Not gradually, not gently, violently. The trajectory curved inward like it had been pulled by invisible hands. The stadium gasped as the ball swerved back toward the goal at terrifying speed. Barthez suddenly reacted. He scrambled desperately across his line. But physics had already been rewritten. The ball slammed into the inside of the left post and flew into the net. Silence lasted half a second. Then chaos erupted. Brazilian players ran in disbelief. French players stared frozen. Barthez turned around slowly, stunned, confused, almost betrayed by reality itself. The Lion crowd roared, not in celebration, but in disbelief. Even French supporters applauded, because they knew they had just witnessed something beyond rivalry. Commentators struggled to describe it. One famously shouted, "That is impossible." Another simply screamed, "What a goal!" Roberto Carlos ran toward the corner flag, smiling like a man who had just solved a puzzle nobody else understood. But even he admitted later that he did not fully understand how extreme the curve had been. Replays immediately flooded television screens. From behind the goal, from the sideline, from aerial cameras. Each angle made the strike look more ridiculous. The ball appeared to travel in two different directions. Scientists would later analyze that kick for years. Physicists studied the aerodynamics. They measured spin, velocity, pressure differences, and air resistance. Researchers discovered the ball traveled at approximately 137 kilometers per hour. They analyzed how Carlos struck the ball with the outside of his left foot, creating extreme side spin. They explained the Magnus effect, the scientific phenomenon where spinning objects curve through the air. But even scientific explanations could not fully capture what it felt like in that moment. Because football is not experienced through equations. Football is experienced through emotion. And that goal felt like magic. Roberto Carlos later revealed he had practiced that type of free kick repeatedly during training sessions with Brazil and Real Madrid. He would stay behind after practice, striking ball after ball from impossible angles. Many attempts failed, some missed by meters. But Carlos believed in repetition. He believed power plus spin could create something unpredictable. Brazilian teammate Cafu once said, "In training, we saw shots like that, but never like the one against France." The goal instantly traveled across the world. News broadcasts replayed it. Sports shows dissected it. Children tried to copy it on dusty fields, beaches, and school grounds. Goalkeepers everywhere developed new fears. And Roberto Carlos, in one moment, transformed from an attacking defender into a global icon. But what most people never realized was how much pressure sat behind that smile. Because Roberto Carlos was not just fighting opponents. He was fighting doubt. He was fighting expectations. And he was fighting a football world that still questioned whether defenders should dare to be artists. The friendly match eventually ended with Brazil winning 1-1. But the scoreline became irrelevant. The goal overshadowed everything. Even French players admitted they had never seen anything like it. Fabien Barthez later confessed he initially thought the ball was missing by at least 2 meters. He said, "I was already thinking about restarting play when suddenly it came back toward the goal." But this moment did more than produce a viral highlight. It changed Roberto Carlos' career forever. Real Madrid fans began to see him differently. Opponents began to fear him. Managers began to design defensive systems specifically to stop his overlapping runs and long-range shots. And football slowly began redefining the role of a fullback. Because before Roberto Carlos, fullbacks defended first. After Roberto Carlos, fullbacks attacked, crossed, scored, and entertained. He was not alone in this revolution. But he was its loudest explosion. The 1997 free kick became a symbol of courage. It represented a player refusing to follow safe options. It represented a moment where instinct defeated logic. And as Roberto Carlos walked back to his defensive position that evening, smiling quietly while cameras zoomed in on his face, He had no idea that goal would still be studied decades later. But destiny was not finished with him, because that strike was not the peak of his journey. It was only the spark. Behind the scenes, Roberto Carlos was about to enter the most demanding chapter of his career, at a club where legends were created and destroyed under unbearable pressure. Real Madrid were building a new identity. They were preparing to assemble one of football's most iconic squads. And Roberto Carlos was about to step into a dressing room filled with superstars, egos, expectations, and relentless global attention. He had bent physics once. Now he would have to survive football's most brutal reality, proving that magic is not created by one moment, but by consistency, sacrifice, and resilience. And as the world replayed that impossible free kick over and over again, Roberto Carlos quietly prepared for the battles that would define whether he was a highlight or a legend. The next stage of his story would test not just his left foot, but his character. Because fame arrives fast in football, but staying at the top demands something far more dangerous. And Roberto Carlos was about to learn that bending physics was easy compared to bending destiny. Real Madrid in the late 1990s was not just a football club. It was a pressure chamber where talent alone was never enough. The Santiago Bernabéu demanded brilliance every week. It demanded trophies every season. And it demanded personalities strong enough to carry the weight of global expectation. When Roberto Carlos arrived in 1996 under manager Fabio Capello, Madrid was desperate to reclaim dominance both in Spain and Europe. Capello immediately recognized Carlos as something different. Not just a defender, not just a runner, but a weapon. Capello once said, "Roberto Carlos changed how we attack from the left side. He made the entire pitch bigger." Carlos quickly became Madrid's most explosive outlet. His overlapping runs turned defensive situations into counterattacks within seconds. His crossing ability fed strikers with deadly precision, and his long-range shooting forced defenders to close him down far outside the penalty area. During the 1996-97 La Liga season, Roberto Carlos played 37 league matches and scored 5 goals. Remarkable numbers for a defender at the time. Real Madrid won the league title that season, ending Barcelona's domestic dominance. But the real challenge for Madrid was always Europe. The UEFA Champions League had become football's ultimate battlefield, and Madrid had not won it since 1966. 32 years without Europe's biggest trophy haunted the club's identity. The pressure was suffocating, but Roberto Carlos thrived under chaos. By the 1997-98 Champions League campaign, Madrid began their climb back toward continental glory. Carlos played a crucial role throughout the tournament. His defensive speed neutralized elite wingers. His attacking presence created numerical advantages down the flank. Madrid reached the final in Amsterdam to face Juventus, a team filled with experience and discipline. Juventus had reached 3 consecutive Champions League finals. They were favorites, but football has always respected courage more than predictions. Madrid won the final 1-0 thanks to Predrag Mijatovic-esque goal. Roberto Carlos played the entire match, delivering relentless energy for 90 minutes. And when the final whistle blew, Madrid had reclaimed European royalty. Carlos lifted his first Champions League trophy, but not his last. Over the next decade, he would become one of the defining faces of the Galactico era. Florentino Perez's presidential vision transformed Madrid into a constellation of global superstars. Luis Figo arrived in 2000. Zinedine Zidane arrived in 2001. Ronaldo Nazario arrived in 2002. David Beckham arrived in 2003. And through all these arrivals, Roberto Carlos remained constant. He was not signed as a marketing statement. He was already the heartbeat of Madrid's left side. Zinedine Zidane once described him simply. He runs like he has 2 hearts. Carlos' partnership with Zidane became legendary. While Zidane orchestrated play with elegance and control, Carlos provided chaos and speed. Together, they stretched defenses beyond tactical limits. During the 2001-02 Champions League campaign, Madrid reached another historic final. Their opponent, Bayer Leverkusen. The match would be remembered for Zidane's iconic volley. But within that final, Roberto Carlos delivered one of the most precise assists in Champions League history. His looping throw-in reached Raul Gonzalez, who scored Madrid's opening goal. It was not flashy, it was not viral, but it was decisive. Madrid won 2-1. Carlos lifted his third Champions League trophy. By that time, he had already won multiple La Liga titles, Spanish Super Cups, and Intercontinental Cups. Yet, while club success elevated his legend, international football presented a more emotional battlefield. Roberto Carlos' relationship with the Brazilian national team was filled with triumph, heartbreak, redemption, and controversy. After his famous free kick in 1997, he became Brazil's undisputed first-choice left-back. Brazil entered the 1998 FIFA World Cup in France as defending champions and tournament favorites. Their squad was stacked with generational talent. Ronaldo was at the peak of his powers. Rivaldo dominated attacking midfield. Cafu commanded the opposite flank. And Roberto Carlos brought explosive energy down the left. Brazil cruised through the tournament, defeating Chile and Denmark with attacking brilliance. They reached the final, once again against host nation France. But the night of July 12, 1998, became one of football's most mysterious and painful chapters. Hours before kickoff, Ronaldo suffered a seizure-like medical episode. Confusion surrounded whether he should play. Brazil entered the final emotionally unstable. France dominated the match. Zinedine Zidane scored twice from corner kicks. Emmanuel Petit sealed a 3-0 victory. Brazil's dream collapsed. Roberto Carlos later admitted that final haunted him for years. He had come to France as a symbol of football magic and left carrying the weight of failure. But Brazilian football has always been built on resilience. By 2002, Brazil arrived at the FIFA World Cup in South Korea and Japan with something to prove. The squad blended experience and hunger. Ronaldo returned from devastating knee injuries. Rivaldo remained creative. Ronaldinho introduced unpredictable genius. And behind them, Cafu and Roberto Carlos formed one of the greatest attacking fullback partnerships football has ever seen. Their chemistry gave Brazil width, speed, and tactical unpredictability. Carlos played every match of the tournament. His defensive discipline matured, his crossing remained lethal, and his leadership grew louder. Brazil reached the final against Germany, another heavyweight clash. Ronaldo scored twice, securing a 2-0 victory. Brazil lifted their fifth World Cup trophy. Roberto Carlos had finally completed football's ultimate redemption arc. He fell to his knees during celebrations, overwhelmed by relief, pride, and emotional closure. Cafu later said, "We did not just win for Brazil. We won for every mistake we carried from 1998. By that point, Roberto Carlos had already changed how the world viewed fullbacks. Before him, defenders were measured by tackles and positioning. After him, defenders were judged by assists, creativity, and attacking influence. Young players across Europe and South America began modeling their games around him. Players like Ashley Cole, Marcelo, Patrice Evra, and Dani Alves would later acknowledge his influence. Marcelo, who would eventually replace Carlos at Real Madrid, openly called him his idol. But legends are never built without controversy. One of Roberto Carlos' most criticized moments arrived during the 2006 FIFA World Cup quarterfinal between Brazil and France. France defeated Brazil 1-0 thanks to Thierry Henry's goal. During the free kick that led to the goal, cameras captured Roberto Carlos briefly turning his back and adjusting his socks instead of marking Henry. The moment became symbolic of Brazil's elimination. Critics blamed him. Media attacked him. Carlos defended himself, explaining tactical confusion and collective defensive failure. But public opinion can be brutal. Shortly after the tournament, Roberto Carlos announced his retirement from international football. He finished with 125 appearances for Brazil, scoring 11 goals and becoming one of the most capped defenders in Brazilian history. His international career closed not with celebration, but with scrutiny. Yet his club journey continued to expand. By 2007, after 11 seasons with Real Madrid, Roberto Carlos left the club as one of its most decorated defenders. He had played 527 matches for Madrid, scoring 69 goals, extraordinary numbers for a fullback. He won 4 La Liga titles and 3 Champions League trophies. He left as a symbol of Madrid's attacking identity. Carlos then joined Turkish club Fenerbahce, where he won the Turkish Super Cup and continued delivering leadership and experience. Later, he played for Corinthians in Brazil and Anzhi Makhachkala in Russia before retiring in 2012. But statistics alone cannot measure Roberto Carlos' legacy, because his career was never about numbers. It was about imagination. It was about fearlessness. And it was about expanding what football believed was possible. Scientists continued studying his 1997 free kick decades later. In 2010, French physicists conducted detailed aerodynamic analysis, confirming that the shot's extreme curvature was caused by intense spin combined with air turbulence around the ball. Their research validated what millions already believed emotionally, that Roberto Carlos had temporarily rewritten football's understanding of ball flight. Carlos himself often laughed when asked if he planned the goal perfectly. He once said, "I aimed at the wall and hoped the ball would come back." That honesty made him more human and somehow more legendary. But beyond trophies, goals, and viral highlights, Roberto Carlos' story carries a deeper message. He was never the tallest defender. He was never tactically perfect. He was never conventional. Yet he trusted his uniqueness. He trusted his instincts. And he trusted repetition more than talent alone. His journey from coffee plantations in Sao Paulo to lifting Champions League and World Cup trophies mirrors football's most powerful truth. Greatness often begins where comfort ends. Roberto Carlos dared to shoot when others would pass. He dared to attack when others would defend. And on one unforgettable evening in Lyon, he dared to strike a ball from an angle most players would consider ridiculous. That single moment did more than score a goal. It gave football one of its most iconic images. It reminded fans that sport is not always logical. Sometimes, sport is poetry written at 137 kilometers per hour. Today, decades after that free kick, young players still attempt to recreate it. They adjust their run-up. They strike with the outside of the foot. They watch the ball fly wide, hoping, praying that it bends back toward history. Most attempts fail, because that goal was never meant to be repeated easily. It was meant to remind the world that football's greatest beauty lies in its unpredictability. Roberto Carlos did not just bend a ball, he bent belief. And perhaps the most beautiful part of his story is that he never tried to become legendary. He simply tried to express himself through football, because sometimes the moments that shock the world are born from players who refuse to play safe. And as football continues evolving, as tactics become more calculated, as data begins shaping decisions, Roberto Carlos' legacy stands as a reminder that magic still belongs in the game. Because without moments like Lyon in 1997, football becomes numbers instead of dreams. And Roberto Carlos gave the sport one of its greatest dreams, a dream where physics surrendered and imagination won. If this story reminded you why football feels bigger than sport, make sure you subscribe and like the video, because every week we uncover the moments that shaped football history and the players who refused to follow ordinary paths. And in the next video, we dive into another unforgettable football legend, the story of the goalkeeper who scored goals and redefined bravery between the posts.